Hi, welcome to our Name the Interval quiz. So this is where we're just going to look at 10 intervals and see if we can work out what they are. So let's have a look at the first one. So we're in the treble clef and we're going from C up to F. Have a little think for a moment about what you think that interval is. Well, it's going from C up to F, so that's going to be a fourth. C, D, E, F. Always count the bottom number as number 1, C, D, E, F, and it's a fourth. If F is the fourth note of C major, that is a perfect fourth, because you work in the major scale of the lower note, regardless of the key of the piece. Work in the major scale of the lower note. And if the upper note comes in the major scale of that lower note, well, if it's a fourth or a fifth or an octave, it will be perfect. If it's anything else, it's major. Second, third, sixth, seventh, it will be major. So because that's a fourth, C, D, E, F, and because F is the fourth note in the scale of C major, that is a perfect fourth. Okay, let's roll on. What do you think about interval number 2? We've got D at the bottom and we've got B at the top. Have a little think. You can always pause this video if you want more thinking time. Okay, well, D is the lower note, B is the upper note. Let's do some counting. So D, E, F, G, A, B. So that's the first thing we need to establish, that this is a 6. So get the number sorted first. So that's a 6. Now remember, the next question is, if we work in the major scale of the lower note, so in other words, the lower note's D, so we think in D major, if that B is the 6th note in the scale of D major, then this will be a major 6. Remember, the 4th, the 5th and the octave start life being perfect. Everything else starts life being major. So if you know your scale of D major, if you're not sure about keys, well, we've got another video out there, several videos actually, about the circle of fifths that will just get you geared up on keys. But the 6th note of D major is in fact B. If you think about it, if you know the scale of D major, you know it's got F sharp in it and C sharp, which means everything else is natural. So B is the 6th note of D major. So therefore, this is a major 6. Remember, fourths, fifths and octaves are perfect. Everything else is major. So this is a 6, so it's starting life as major. Because B is the 6th note in the scale of D major, it's a major 6. Okay, onwards and upwards. Interval number 3, E flat at the bottom to B flat at the top. Now don't worry about flats and things for a moment, just do your counting. It's E something, F something, G something, A something, B something. So we're talking about a fifth. So you can commit to this interval being a fifth. And then just think, fifth, that means it should start life as perfect. 4th, 5th octave, perfect. Everything else major. If we work in the scale of E flat major, and we know this is a fifth, the question is, what's the 5th note in the scale of E flat major? If you know your keys, you know E flat major's got B flat, E flat and A flat. Ooh, we mentioned B flat, didn't we? So B flat is in the key signature, so it will be the 5th note of the scale of E flat major. So this is a perfect fifth. 4th, 5th and octave, remember? Perfect. So this is a perfect fifth. Okay, let's look at the next one straight away. Number 4, F at the bottom, F at the top. So that should be reasonably straightforward. What do you think that one is? Pause at any point to think about these things. Obviously, if it's going from F to F, well, it's an octave, isn't it? We're going from one F up to the next F, so it's an octave. And remember that 4th, 5th and octaves are perfect. So if it's F natural at the bottom and it's F natural at the top, it must be a perfect octave. So that's not too complicated to work out. Let's move straight on to number 5. What do you think is going on here? We've got E at the bottom, G at the top. Have a think. Well, E to G is a third, E, F, G. So we commit to it being a third, and then we're thinking, okay, if it's a third, it sort of starts life as major, doesn't it? Okay, so let's think, is the third note of E major G natural? Well, again, use the circle of fifths if you need to, or if you know your keys because you've played all these scales or whatever, it doesn't matter which way you do it, but you will soon discover that the third note of E major is G sharp. E major's got 4 sharps, F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, D sharp. So we mentioned G sharp there. So this is telling us something. If E was going up to G sharp, then that would be a major third. But in fact, it's not going up to G sharp, it's going to G natural. So just think, that's E, that's G sharp, but it's not G sharp, which would be the major third, it's G natural. So this interval is 1 semitone smaller than a major interval. Well, this is how it works. If you have a perfect interval and it gets a semitone bigger, it's augmented. If you have a perfect interval and it gets a semitone smaller, it's diminished. So if it gets bigger, it's augmented. It gets smaller, it's diminished. If you have a major interval, if it gets bigger, it's augmented, just the same way. If it gets a semitone smaller, it becomes minor. And if it becomes a semitone smaller again, it becomes diminished. So with the perfect intervals, it's perfect, or it gets bigger for augmented, or smaller for diminished. With the major interval, bigger for augmented, but when it gets smaller, it goes minor before it gets smaller again for diminished. So if E to G sharp is a major third, so there's E, there's G sharp. Actually, if it's not G sharp but G natural, can you see my hands have got closer together? So it's a semitone smaller. This is a minor third. Okay, and just to make it more fun, here's the next 5 in the bass clef. So this time we've got E at the bottom again, and we've got A sharp at the top. So let's think about the number. What do we think the number of this interval is? Well, it's a fourth, E, F, G, A. So that's a fourth, so you can write fourth. Then you're thinking fourths. That's making me think perfect, isn't it? So if A sharp is the fourth note of E major, that will be a perfect fourth. So let's think. Key signature of E major, what did we say it was? F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, D sharp. But I didn't mention A sharp, did I? So A should be natural. So if it was E going up to A, it would be a perfect fourth. So E to A is a perfect fourth, but this isn't A, it's A sharp. So what's happened to my interval? It's got 1 semitone bigger. So if I take a perfect interval, make it a semitone bigger, it becomes augmented. So this is an augmented fourth. Okay, number 7 is F to G flat. Okay, well the counting's not going to be too difficult there, is it? Because you've got F, G. So this is a second. Okay, any idea what kind of second? Have a little think about that. Well, if the lower note's F, we're thinking in the scale of F major. If you know your key signature for F major, you know it's got 1 flat, which is B flat. So everything else is natural. So if F was going up to G natural, that would be a major second. So F to G, major second. But it's not F to G, it's F to G flat. So do you see what's happened? That interval's got a semitone smaller, hasn't it? So what's a semitone smaller than major? Minor. So that's a minor second. Okay, what do you make of interval number 8? Have a little look at that for a moment. Well, there are 2 ways we can count this. One is to count all the way from the bottom to the top. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and we could call that a tenth. The other thing we can do is either to move the top note down an octave or move the bottom note up an octave. In this case, probably easier to move the bottom one up an octave, so you get C there. C to E, C, D, E is a third. So if it's a third, but in fact it's not a third, it's an octave and a third, we call it a compound third. So compound just means the interval's bigger than an octave, all right? So it's a compound something third. Now you can call it a tenth, but then you get a little bit muddled as to what's perfect and what's major. So I think the compound system is easier really. Move that C up an octave and then you think, okay, that's a third. But write the word compound because it is actually bigger than an octave. C to E, well, if it's a third, it should be major. C major, no sharps, no flats. So in fact, that E will be a major third above the C. So it's a compound major third, and that's the order in which you should write it. Compound major third. Number 9. Oh, we've got E at the bottom again, so another one with E at the bottom. Let's count up. What do you think the interval is here in terms of its number? Well, E up to D something is going to be a seventh. Now you could sort of think, well, actually E to E is an octave, so if it's E to D it must be a seventh. It's a quicker way of doing it than going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but you could do it either way. It's a seventh. Sevenths are supposed to be major before they go anywhere else. So is D sharp the seventh note in the scale of E major? Well, let's have a think. E major, 4 sharps, F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, D sharp. Oh, D sharp, we just mentioned it. So in other words, D sharp is the seventh note of E major, therefore this is a major seventh. And last but not least, interval number 10. Big wide one, so we're thinking that word again, aren't we? Compound. Okay, we've got D at the bottom, we've got B flat at the top, right compound. Then you can either bring the B flat down an octave or you can bring the D up an octave. Let's maybe think about bringing the D up an octave. So D up to B, D, E, F, G, A, B. So it's a compound something 6. Much easier than counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm running out of numbers or getting something wrong. So compound something 6. If we're in the key of D major's got 2 sharps, F sharp and C sharp. Which means, of course, that it not only tells us that F sharp and C sharp are present, it tells us that everything else is natural. So B should be natural, and we're dealing with a 6, so 6 start life being major. So D to B is a major 6, but this is D to B flat. One semitone smaller that distance, isn't it? So what's one semitone smaller than a major? It's a minor. So this is a compound minor 6. So I hope that's exercised the brain in a useful way and has helped to build your confidence with naming intervals.